I have been rendered warm hospitality, and I appreciate the invitation for me to attend this event. Before I entered this room, I had a brief conversation with Dr. Kissinger. I asked him, well, 45 years ago, on your plane to China on this secret visit, what's on your mind? He didn't say much. He didn't share with me any of his secret thoughts. He just told me that at that time, China-US trade was almost zero, or even less than what was traded between the United States and a small country in Central America. Well, at that time, he might be predicting that 40 years later, 45 years later, China-US trade will take up 1/5 of the world's total trade. And combined, our two economies will take up 1/3 of the world's total 45 years ago, 45 years later. Well, that's the magic of change. That's how much has changed. But sometimes a man proposes, but God disposes. Because in 2008, the global financial crisis broke out. Back then, world trade was almost collapsed. Well, but 8 years later, today, world trade is still sluggish, and there have been a series of challenges. Well, today, I attended a meeting on the large movement of refugees and migrants at the United Nations. And in many parts of the world, we see terrorist attacks. Although we still cannot confirm the nature of what has been happening around the world, but people worry. Well, just a day before I departed for the United States, there was this explosion right here in New York. We all live in the same planet Earth, and no one can stay immune. The geopolitical conflict has kept propping up. Just now, Dr. Kissinger asked, when China's economy equals that of the United States, what kind of political, geopolitical changes there will be? Now, let me address that question. Even if China's economy is on par with that of the United States, the United States is the largest developed country in the world, and China is the largest developing country in the world, and that reality has not changed. There is still a long way to go for China in its modernization drive. Well, size is important, but per capita figure is more important. Now, for the United States, the per capita GDP is 7 times that of China's per capita GDP. For China to reach the level of a middle-income country, well, our goal is that it will happen by the mid of this century. Now, as things stand, people are seeing that China's economy is growing rapidly, and at the same time, people also have questions. It seems that China's economy is slowing down, and will that create problems? Indeed, we need to answer this question from two perspectives, and that is not easy. What I'm trying to say today is that as the world economy have this slow recovery, as the world trade is declining in growth, well, last year world trade was down by 13%. Well, China, its economy is so closely integrated with that of the world economy. We still maintain steady growth of our economy. But there is a change, or something has changed. The growth rate has slowed down. And there are many reasons. One important reason is in 2014, China's economy in size reached $10 trillion. Well, around the world, economies above 2 or 3 trillion US, if they keep growing by double-digit growth rate, there is no precedent. It is never seen. But for China, for the past 3 to 4 years, our growth rate has been kept at above 6.5%. Well, this year, in the first 6 months, our economy grew by 6.7%. Well, that rate, well, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, to China means an increment generated by double-digit growth rate, because that means every year the increments will be 800 billion US, equivalent to the economy of a medium-sized economy. We will maintain such a medium-high growth rate. People may ask, as a major economy, well, China has been one of the top in terms of growth rate. Why do you still want to sustain such a medium-high growth rate? That is because in China we have 1.3 billion people. Every year, there are 13 million or 14 million people need new jobs in urban areas. And we have, according to our standard, 50 million people living in poverty. So in China, we need to keep developing, and in that process, create jobs, or sufficient jobs. We need to mobilize our national resources to fight poverty. I can say here that in the third quarter of this year or till the end of this year, China's economy will maintain this momentum of a steady growth, as we saw in the first half of this year. For the past 3 years, every year we create 13 million new urban jobs. And this year, from January to August, we created 9.5 million new urban jobs. Talking about new urban jobs, maybe some people will say, what does that mean to the United States? Would that mean that there will be implications for jobs in the United States? Well, look at China-US trade figures. You will find that Chinese investment to the United States and China's import of industrial goods, agricultural produce from the United States have created millions of jobs for the United States, inside the United States. If China's economy cannot sustain such a growth rate, to be honest, that will have negative implications to the United States, to the U.S. jobs. And vice versa, if the U.S. economy is not doing well as the largest economy in the world, it is bad news for China as well. So we are interdependent. Just now in his remarks, Dr. Kissinger said that China's economy is in the process of transformation and upgrading. How can we still sustain this medium-high growth rate? That is because we are going for restructuring of China's economy. On the one hand, we are transforming and upgrading traditional industries, including phasing outdated production capacities. And at the same time, we are fostering new drivers, new dynamisms. The new drivers generate enormous hope. Whether in rural China or cities, if you have the chance, go to China and you will see that new business types, new industries, and new technologies are mushrooming day by day. With a mobile phone, some people can provide the services for people living in northern part of China to have a holiday in the southern part of China in winter. And they can provide low-price housing services in the real estate sector to those holiday makers. And in rural areas, the agricultural produce, the farmers sometimes find it hard to sell what they produce. But if they go online, you don't have to set up a counter by the field. For example, 2 yuan of orange. If you go online, 5 yuan per half a kilogram. So these are the new drivers emerging. And still, we don't have the full picture. This is just a few examples. These new dynamisms and new driving forces are transforming our traditional industries. And our traditional industries, combined with new driving forces, are being elevated to higher levels. China's economic structure is undergoing these huge changes. Now, the service sector, its contribution to GDP has exceeded 60%. Well, for the past 2 years, the growth rate has been 4 to 5 percentage points. And the momentum continues to sustain. Why could we achieve such a growth? And why do we think that we can keep this continued and steady growth? In the fundamental way, it is because of reform and opening up. Reform and opening up has carried China this far for the past 3 decades, and going forward, we still need to rely on reform and opening up to go further. Just now, I mentioned the new drivers and new dynamisms, and they create a lot of employment opportunities. We're also working to streamline our administration while strengthening regulation. On the one hand, we are relaxing the administration over the entrepreneurs when they want to start up their business. At the same time, the government provides a service platform so that the businesses can compete with each other on this level playing field. And we also reform the business registration sector and administration approval system. We want to promote a mass entrepreneurship and innovation. Every day, there are 15,000 new businesses get registered. And last year, that figure was 14,000. Before these reforms were started, the newly registered businesses grew by about 2 times compared with previous years. China has 1.3 billion people. 170 million people have received higher education or have special skills, and that is rarely seen in other parts of the world. So we have a huge reservoir of human capital. If we can bring market potential to full play, if we can unleash all the creativities in the society, what can be achieved is a lot. And there are huge choices and options for consumers. Well, in China, we say that 3 ordinary people can outsmart a best strategist, and 3 persons working together, there is a teacher that can teach me something. Well, the figure 3 can mean limitless numbers. Confucius say that 1 gives birth to 2, 2 gives birth to 3, and 3 generates the world. So 3 means the massive general public. Well, people are now innovating, and they are the players directly involved in the market. So if their creativity can be brought into full play, how much can be achieved?
At the same time, we're also advancing opening up, and in recent years, the Chinese government has abolished 40% of the items that previously require administrative approval, and also the items that require approval for foreign investment, or the items which are restricted for foreign investment, have been slashed by half. And I often receive a letter from foreign companies and investors. They complain about the business environment in China. But on the other hand, I also often receive reports from U.S.-China Business Council. According to their analysis, in last year, over 90% of American companies are making profits in China. And in the first half of this year, U.S. investment in China has grown by 1.2 folds. And when there was no trade between China and the United States, there was no trade complaints, there was no trade disputes, and there was not even a direct flight between our 2 countries. So President Dr. Kissinger had to come to China on a plane of a 3rd country, and now we have such a big trade volume and such big mutual investment. So it is inevitable that we may have trade frictions and differences. But these frictions and differences are not the mainstream. They only account for a very small part of our cooperation. But of course, we cannot turn a blind eye to these very small part of frictions. We need to expand our common ground and a common interest while properly resolving our differences. China has made enormous economic and social progress over the past 3 decades and more, and it is attributable to a peaceful international environment and a stable neighborhood environment. And so while pursuing reform and opening up, China will also be firm in following the path of peaceful development. As I said earlier, China is a developing country. We have 1.3 billion people. The central and the western regions are still lagging far behind. eastern regions, and there is even a bigger gap between the urban and rural areas. If China can manage its own affairs well, if China can achieve modernization, it will be a huge contribution to the world in itself. And we are maintaining a stable growth rate. Our contribution rate to the world economy is now 30%. China and the United States combined, our contribution to world economic growth is over 50%. China is willing to uphold the international order that was established after the Second World War. And at the general debate of the UNGA, I will reaffirm China's position. That is, we uphold the sanctity of the UN Charter. We uphold the authority of the United Nations in coordinating international affairs. And of course, the international system and the international governance system need to be improved. China, as a developing country, hopes that there will be greater voice of developing countries in the international governance system. And we also hope to promote inclusive economic growth and balanced economic and social progress. In international relations, countries, big or small, need to work together. They need to respect each other, treat each other as equals, and jointly uphold a world of harmony. China and the United States may differ in national circumstances and cultural backgrounds, but we are willing to promote mutual respect and a win-win cooperation with the United States. China believes in cultural diversity, and we maintain that cultural exchanges and mutual learning are important. We believe that all countries and all nations have their own civilization that they are proud of. So China will be a constructive player in international relations. We also believe that in its course of modernization, we need to learn advanced technology and the managerial expertise of foreign countries. We need to form a mutually beneficial and a win-win relationship with the United States, the largest developed country in the world. I believe that this is a strategic policy we will follow in the following decades. Even China becomes a modern, medium-sized, modern and developed country at a medium level. We will never forget the teaching of our ancestors, that is, we should not do unto others things we do not want to do unto ourselves. We will continue to follow the path of peaceful development. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier Li, for your words, and Dr. Kissinger for your informed introduction. The rest of the program will be consecutively translated, so you'll no longer need your headsets. And as is the tradition of the club, we will now introduce our questioners, all members of the Economic Club. And at the request of Premier Li, there will be 4 questioners this evening. They will include William Berkley, Chairman and CEO of W.R. Berkley Corporation; Thomas Farley, President of New York Stock Exchange; Susie Garib, Senior Special Correspondent for Fortune; and Robert Hormats, Vice Chairman of Kissinger and Associates. We will go in alphabetical order, so Mr. Berkley, you have the first question.
Premier, as China has become more and more of a global power and seeks to do business around the world, it's important that its markets become open to competitors from around the world. How do you see that evolving, and how do you see the markets in China becoming more open?
总理先生，我的问题是这样的：随着更多的中国企业走出去，在世界各地的市场开展投资和经营活动，我们也期待中国的市场能够进一步开放，吸引来自外国的经商者。您对此怎么看？您对中国市场进一步开放有什么看法？
中国在对外开放的初期，我们是注重叫做引进来，就是吸引外资。中国发展到今天，我们发现，在全球化的背景下，我们需要跟跨国公司合作。中国的企业本身也要国际化，所以我们现在叫做引进来和走出去并重。但是对中国这样一个发展中国家来说，我们仍然需要大量的外资进入。这不仅仅是我们需要资金，的确，它对中国经济有推动作用。比如现在在中国，我们实际利用外资已经累计达到1.7万亿美金，又变换了方式，不是同船了，要交船是吧？
对。
所以我停顿一下，你们也可以吃一口饭。
Well, as this is a consecutive interpreting, maybe I'll take a pause for you to have some time to have some food. In the early days of China's opening up, we put most of the emphasis on bringing in foreign investment. But for China's economy to come to where it is today, in the age of globalization, now we are making great efforts to work with multinationals, and Chinese companies are also finding more opportunities to invest overseas. So nowadays, we are giving equal emphasis to bringing in foreign investors and for Chinese companies to go global. We are attracting foreign investment not just for the sake of capital. It's true that the capital has been essential in boosting China's economy, but this is not the sole purpose. As you may know, currently the total paid in foreign investment made in China has reached $1.7 trillion US dollars.
中国已经24年连续成为外资直接投资最大的发展中国家。我们现在依然想使中国成为外资投入的热土。这不仅仅是刚才我说的，我们需要外资推动的力量，我们更需要外资带来的新的管理理念、先进的技术。当然，我要明确，我们的在技术方面的合作是没有先决条件的，我们不会强迫外资到中国必须转让他们的技术。
For 24 years in a row, China has been the largest recipient of foreign direct investment among all the developing countries. And going forward, we hope that China will remain one of the most attractive destinations for foreign investment. As I just said, attracting foreign investment is not just for the capital. It is also for working with multinationals to draw upon their advanced technologies and managerial expertise. But one thing is clear here, that is in the technological cooperation, such cooperation has no prerequisite attached, and there will be no mandatory requirement for technology transfer.
当然，我也听到有一些外资负责人他们对中国在某些领域进入市场准入有限制提出意见。我可以明确地说， 中国改革开放的时间并不长，我们很多行业它正在逐渐成熟的过程当中，它的成熟的过程也是逐步扩大开放的过程。中国对外资准入的领域会越来越宽，我们的大门打开了，会越打越大，绝不会关上。
At the same time, I have heard certain complaints from the business leaders of foreign invested companies saying that they still face some restrictions in accessing Chinese market. To them, I want to say that it has not been that long since China launched its reform and opening up program, and some sectors in the Chinese economy have not become mature ones. But this process of them becoming more mature is also a process for them to further open up. And the areas of China's economy open to foreign investment will only increase, and China will only open its door even wider. This door will not close.
在座的各位，只要你们有资金，对中国有投资的愿望，我们热烈的欢迎。具体的项目，我们可以在下面磋商。
For all of you, as long as you have the capital and the interest of making investment in China, you are more than welcome to come to invest in the Chinese market. Specific projects can be discussed later.
Next.
Premier Lee, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for having us in your hotel. This is lovely. It truly is an honor, and thank you very much. The United States and China need each other more than ever as the two strongest economies, as quite frankly the strongest economies. But yet, and you spoke in your speech about mutual respect, and there is no doubt mutual respect. But yet there's so much negativity and even an element of mistrust. You know, you see the press here, and there's articles about currency rate setting or the respect for intellectual property in China. And on my trips to China, I've noticed that the Chinese press even finds negative things to say about the United States, amazingly. But my question truly is, what can we do about this level of mistrust? How can we reduce the level of mistrust, increase the level of cooperation? And in particular, is there anything that frustrates you about misperceptions that America have about your country?
非常感谢总理今天能够在您的国家所拥有的酒店接待我们。当然，非常荣幸今天能够有机会向您提问。我认为中美两国都非常需要彼此，中美两国是世界上最强大的经济体。我也赞同您在演讲中提到的相互尊重这个看法。但同时，我们也看到我们两国之间也存在着互不信任的问题。 我在美国可以看到关于中国人民币汇率，还有中国对于知识产权保护和尊重等方面的负面报道。当我去中国的时候，在中国的媒体也看到不少关于美国的负面报道。所以我想问，我们怎么做才能够应对这一互不信任问题，来减少互不信任和加强美中之间的合作？还有就是，您对于美国对中国的误解。 哪一点让您最觉得懊恼？
中美之间啊，的确有误解，也有分歧，但是总的来讲，我们之间的理解远远大于误解和分歧。具体的分歧经常有，譬如刚才你说这是中国国家拥有的酒店。 我想做一点纠正，就是这个酒店是中国的，一位民营企业家买了他的股权，我听说好像还是由美国的企业家长期负责经营。
It's true there are misconceptions and differences between our two countries, but I believe the level of mutual understanding and common interests between our two countries far outweighs such misconceptions and differences. And just now you said my hotel, coming to my hotel, but I want to make a correction here for the record. That is, as far as I know, this hotel is for a business leader from a private company in China holding a stake in the hotel, but the hotel still under long-standing management of American businessmen.
所以我这次下榻的依然是美国人的酒店。
So I'm thinking I'm still staying at an American hotel.
至于说媒体相互的报道，我觉得也要全面的看。你如果打开某个媒体，我这里也不想给某个媒体做广告，他对对方国家的报道是多篇的，可能很多客观真实的报道，读者往往不注意，而有一些挑骨头里面挑刺的报道，往往会吸引眼球，这跟读者也有关系。
Well, talking about the mutual media coverage of each other's countries, I think we need to take a look at the whole picture instead of a partial picture. If you open the news products of a certain media organization here, I don't want to name it, not for advertisement, but I believe you will find the coverage is quite multifaceted. Sometimes truthful and objective coverage may not get people's eye, but nitpicking or sensational stories get people's attention.
当然，用鸡蛋鸡蛋里面挑骨头这个词儿用的可能重了一些，我觉得呢，媒体记者如果是出于善意，做一些批评的报道，对我们互相之间改进我们自己的工作也不无帮助。
Well, using nitpicking here may be a little bit too much. If it is a well-intentioned coverage reporting, even if it is a critical one, I think it should be welcomed because it is good for us to improve what we have been doing.
至于你说到的具体问题，像人民币汇率，这一类的问题，我要解答起来，会用比较长的时间。但是我一句话想说，就是中国的人民币不存在长期贬值的基础，中国也绝不会用贬值的手段来刺激出口，这对中国经济的升级是没有帮助的，没有益处的。
As for the specific topics you alluded to in your question, like currency rate, we wouldn't have that much time for me to dig into the details, but I just want to say that there's not a basis for the continuous devaluation of the Chinese currency, and China has no intention whatsoever to use the devaluation of the Chinese yuan to boost the exports, because that is not good for China's economic transformation.
如果你要问到如何增加信任、消除误解，那我觉得还是要多往来。现在中国去年到美国的游客就有260万，在这里的留学生有60万，而据我所知，很多美国人还没有去过中国，他们可能多次去过中美洲的国家。
As for how we can do to boost mutual trust and narrow misconceptions and differences, I think the key lies in closer mutual engagement. As far as I know, last year, Chinese tourists made 2.6 million trips to the United States, and now there are some 600,000 Chinese students studying in the United States. But I also know that for many Americans, maybe they have not been to China yet. Maybe many of them have been to Central American countries instead.
我对那些希望增加互信人的建议，就是我们加强往来，人与人之间的往来，人与人之间的沟通，而且是坦诚的进行。
So I believe the key to deepening our mutual trust lies in close engagement and a larger interflow of personnel between the two countries so that we can have candid and deep discussions and communication between us to deepen mutual understanding.
Next.
Okay. Susie,
Premier Lee, over here. Thank you so much for your very refreshing speech and your encouraging words. I'd like to follow up on some of the comments that you have made in answering these questions. Many American business leaders tell me that they are very worried about the current backlash to globalization and global trade that's building here in the U.S. And I'm sure you've heard the candidates who are running for president here in the States have very harsh words about the loss of American jobs and unfair global trade agreements. Given that China's economic growth really depends on global trade, and you said that there is a mutual interest between our country and China, how concerned are you about this developing trend? What would you say to the presidential candidates in terms of advice? And also to the American public to reassure them that they shouldn't worry about this.
您的演讲和刚才的答问呢，都让我有一种耳目一新，而且深受鼓舞的感觉。我在跟许多美国企业界的领袖接触的时候呢，他们告诉我，他们都对现在美国出现的逆全球化和反对世界贸易的这种潮流感到担心。您肯定也听到了美国现在的总统竞选人对于美国丧失就业岗位以及不公平的全球贸易协议所发出的强硬的表态。所以我也知道中国经济的增长呢，很大程度上是得益于世界贸易的发展。您也谈到了，这对于中美两国是符合我们共同利益的。所以我想问的问题是，您对于这种不断发展的趋势有多担心？那如果要向美国总统候选人提出建议的话，在这个问题上您会对他说什么？以及您会对美国公众说什么，来缓解他们对这一趋势的担心？
我这次到联合国参加系列会议，当然应该是到纽约来。之前就有朋友告诉我，你这个时候到美国去的不是时候 ，It's not the right time。
Well, yes, I'm coming to attend the UN high-level events, but as I'm coming to New York, before I came here, some friends already said to me that they don't think I'm coming to the city at the right time.
因为现在美国大选正在进入白热化的阶段，这是美国的内政，我对此能说的话非常有限。我记得上个世纪80年代，我曾经访问过美国，我到两党的竞选总部都去访问过。他们问我，都问我，每一个总部的人都问我，你喜欢不喜欢我们的候选人？我只能告诉他一句话，我说不管谁当选，我相信中美关系一定向好。
Because the U.S. presidential election is about to reach a white heat point. This is the United States' internal affair. So for me, things that I can say about this topic is very limited. But I recall that in the 1980s, during my visit to the United States, I also went to both headquarters of the two political parties for the presidential campaigns. And at both places, I was asked whether I like the presidential candidates. And to both of them, I said that no matter who gets elected, I have confidence in the continued positive growth of China-US relations.
你们让我以中国总理的身份站在这样一个讲台上，我还只能重复我过去说过的一句话： 不管大选之后谁任总统，中美关系，我相信一定会稳定向好。
Well, now you have put me at such a podium, and considering my current capacity, I can only repeat what I said years ago. That is, no matter who gets elected in the U.S. presidential election, I believe that China-U.S. ties will continue to grow steadily and in a positive direction.
Premier Lee.
我还没说完。但是明天啊，我要参加联合国一般性辩论，要发表演讲。我在这个演讲当中，一定是要说全球化的，一定是要说贸易自由化和投资便利化的。请大家一定不要误解，这和美国大选无关。
But tomorrow I will give a statement at the general debate of the UN General Assembly. In my statement, I will definitely say something about globalization and global trade, but don't misread it as these having anything to do with US presidential election.
在全球化过程当中，某些领域、某些行业、某些人群，确实有一些负面的影响，但是只有靠全球化、贸易自由化、投资便利化，才能解决这些弊端。我们不能因噎废食。美国是全球化、贸易自由化的继英国之后的最大的受益者，中国现在也是受益者之一。我们愿意和大家共同努力，来维护贸易的自由化，来更加合理的推进全球化。我们也会注意有些人群发出的呼声，我们可以去妥善的处理这些问题。总之，世界的潮流是向前的。
Globalization may also have some downsides or adverse impact on certain areas, sectors, and groups of people. But I believe that to address these downsides, we can still and we must rely on continued globalization, trade liberalization, and investment facilitation. Just as one does not give up eating for the fear of choking on his food, as the Chinese saying goes. Following the United Kingdom, the United States has been the biggest beneficiary from globalization, and China is also a big beneficiary from this trend. So we want to work with all other parties in the global community. One of the big beneficiaries from globalization. So China wants to work with all members of the international community to continue to advance trade liberalization and advance globalization as appropriate. But in the meantime, we should also pay high attention to the calls and aspirations of relevant groups of people and see to it their concerns will be properly addressed. But all in all, I believe the world's trend will continue to move forward.
请大家理解，中文是联合国的官方语言，所以我用中文发言。
I hope you will understand, as Chinese is one of the official languages of the UN, so I should speak in Chinese here.
Premier Lee, first let me thank you very much for your very thoughtful and very comprehensive speech. You honor us by your presence tonight and by your leadership and your vision. I would like to follow up one of the points that you made in your speech in the question and answer session on the trading system. As you correctly pointed out, global trade has been declining over the last several years. You also pointed out how interdependent our two countries and many others are on the global trading system. One of the concerns now, in addition to the decline in global trade, is that in many countries throughout the world, we see increased economic nationalism, we see domestic pressures for localization, we see various groups who want to pull back from the global trading system rather than take the lead in improving the global trading system. Those pressures occur in the United States, in China, and many other countries. But you also make the fundamental point that we need a global trading system. We need an open and thriving global system. So my question is, what can China and the U.S. do together to reverse this deterioration in support for the global trading system, to make sure that it thrives and becomes more open rather than less open? And in particular, are there opportunities for the United States and China through the negotiation of the bilateral investment treaty to take the lead together in strengthening international rules, strengthening the rules, improving the opportunities for global investment, which will stimulate growth and stimulate additional trade?
李总理，刚才您的演讲既全面又思想深刻，而且我也非常赞赏您在演讲和答问中展现出来的远见卓识和领导力。我的问题呢，也是跟全球贸易有关的。我想您在演讲当中呢，也已经一针见血地指出，近几年呢，全球贸易增长十分乏力。同时，我也非常赞同您说的，我们两国之间以及世界许多其他国家，在全球贸易的体系下呢，相互依存度都是很高的。但同时，我们也有这样的一种担忧，就是在许多国家出现了经济民族主义抬头的这种趋势，而且国内面临巨大压力，要使生产本地化。还有人呢，希望逆全球贸易体系而动，而不是进一步改善全球贸易体系。在美国、在中国、在世界许多国家，可能都有这种趋势发展的发展的一些迹象。所以我想提问您的问题呢，就是美中两国能够一起做什么，使扭转这种减少对世界贸易体系支持的这种趋势，而共同努力加强全球贸易体系，使它变得更为开放，而不是相反。还有呢，就是美中两国如何抓住通过BIT 谈判所带来的机遇，共同发挥领导作用，来增强全球贸易的国际规则，创造更多可以刺激国际世界经济增长和繁荣的机会。
我觉得美中两国应该共同向世界发声。我们都支持国际现行贸易体系的安排，支持在 WTO 框架下推进贸易自由化和投资的便利化。中美两国和其他国家一起在国际上发声，会有利于避免逆全球化的进程出现，也有利于避免贸易壁垒、以邻为壑的现象屡屡发生，其结果殃及的是世界经济复苏的大局。
Well, I believe China and the United States should send a common message to the international community. Both of our two countries are strong supporters of the existing global trading regime, and we both believe that we need to advance trade liberalization and investment facilitation under the WTO framework. So China and the US should work together with all other countries in the world to send out a strong and concerted message, and I believe this will help prevent the anti-globalization trend from further evolving and help prevent the trade barriers and a beggar-thy-neighbor approach from emerging, because these And the anti-globalization trade or the approach that I just mentioned are not good for the enhancement of global economic recovery.
其实，中美两国应该进一步扩大相互的开放，不仅是贸易，包括投资。我们正在进行的 BIT 谈判，实际上是给中美工商界都发出了一个积极的信号。中方尽最大努力，已经在这2年内3次改进了报价，现在正在进行第29轮中美 BIT 的谈判。我们需要的是美方做出反应了。我觉得我们之间只要采取务实、灵活的态度，是可以达成一个高水平的、互利共赢的 BIT。
Well, secondly, I believe our two countries need to further open up to each other in both trade and mutual investment. Now China and the United States are engaged in the BIT negotiation. The negotiation in itself has sent out a positive message to the business communities of both countries. China has exerted strong efforts in this respect, and in just 2 years put forward revised offers for 3 times. And now the two countries are engaged in the 29th round of BIT negotiation. We are now waiting for a response from the US side. I believe that as long as both sides take a pragmatic and flexible approach, we will be able to arrive at a high standard and mutually beneficial BIT.
你的问题也提醒我，在这个场合可以讲2件事儿，来表明中方对美扩大开放的诚意。就是我们最近已经完成了对美国带骨舒华牛肉的检疫，我们很快会确定从美国进口带骨牛肉。中国是一个农产品大国，也是个畜牧生产大国，但是美国有好的牛肉，我们为什么不让中国的消费者给他们更多的选择的权利呢？
Well, your question reminds me that there are 2 things that I can share with you here, showing Chinese sincerity about opening up its market to the United States. One is China's domestic governmental authorities have completed the quarantine procedures for imports of US beef with bone, and we will soon have such imports of beef from the United States. Well, China itself is a large producer of agricultural products and in animal husbandry, but we also recognize that the United States has very good beef. So why should we deny Chinese customers this good choice?
谢谢 ，Thank you。如果我要是在美国的中西部宣布这个消息的话， 我得到的掌声会更热烈。
I'm sure there will be louder applause if I say it in Midwest United States, in Midwest United States.
但是这是在纽约，我还想说一下，我们已经决定在纽约设立一家人民币的清算行，而且欢迎纽约有条件的银行设立人民币清算行，这样会有利于我们之间 更顺利的跨境贸易。
And one more thing, as I'm in New York, I want to say that we have decided to designate a Chinese invested bank as a clearing bank for RMB business in New York. And we also welcome those foreign banks in New York who meet the eligibility requirements to become clearing banks for Chinese RMB business. I'm sure that will only further boost our engagement.
主席先生希望我现在欣赏一下美国的牛肉。我的讲话到此为止。
Well, it seems that Mr. President wants me to have the chance to taste U.S. beef during our dinner, so maybe I'll wrap up my remarks.
欢迎大家收看华尔街电视简报。我们现在给大家播报的主要内容包括：乡村花园在现金紧缩之际遭遇多年来最大的销售下滑；一个准妈妈为了得到 RSV 疫苗而付出的努力，反映了健康政策的问题；NSA 官员揭露中国黑客的隐秘和禁区黑客攻击；美国和印度将共同生产装甲车辆以对抗中国；华尔街经理人以大幅折扣涌入封闭式基金。请大家收看。碧桂园在现金紧缩之际遭遇多年来最大的销售下滑。彭博社，中国开发商碧桂园控股有限公司经历了至少6年来最大的销售下滑，因为对其完成项目能力的担忧导致了资金紧缩。10月份的签约销售额较去年同期下降了 81.1%， 而9月份下降了 80.7%。该开发商在10月份违约了1笔美元债券，这也引发了对其未来的担忧。值得一提的是，碧桂园表示，今年前10个月已交付约46万套住宅。一个准妈妈为了得到 RSV 疫苗而付出的努力，反映了健康政策的问题。华盛顿邮报，一位来自银泉的女士寻求 RSV 疫苗来保护她的宝宝，结果却变成了一场折磨。马里兰州银泉的汉娜·费格利 Hannah Fegley 说，上个月她怀孕的第8个月，她花了7个小时打电话给保险公司、药店效益管理者和半打药店，试图获得辉瑞公司的新 RSV 疫苗，名为 Abrysvo。呼吸道合胞病毒每年使多达 2% 的婴儿住院，因为他们娇小的气道无法承受炎症。虽然大多数人通过支持性护理康复，但每年有多达300名5岁以下的儿童死亡，其中大多数是1岁以下的婴儿。婴儿期严重的 RSV 病例可能意味着终身哮喘。费格利说，他的2个朋友去年看到他们的宝宝进入重症监护室，那是 RSV 的一个严重季节，所以他渴望得到这个疫苗。他有一个在学前班的4岁孩子，他说每次都带回来各种病毒。KFF 健康新闻的一个重要项目是本月账单，读者和听众向我们发送关于美国医疗系统如何让他们失望的故事。通常，他们遇到的问题直接与政府政策的漏洞有关。费格利的故事展示了监管机构的建议如何渗透到一个碎片化的医疗系统中，使患者陷入困境。NSA 官员揭露中国黑客的隐秘和禁区黑客攻击。华盛顿邮报，根据美国国家安全局 NSA 高级官员的说法，中国黑客越来越多地将复杂的恶意软件引入美国的关键基础设施。NSA 网络安全合作中心主任摩根·亚当斯基警告称，中国的策略旨在削弱美国的能力。亚当斯基表示，所谓的0日漏洞的使用正在增加。CyberWarcom 会议上的2名研究人员指出，中国的一项法律要求在48小时内报告漏洞，这有助于北京收集这些漏洞。亚当斯基还警告称，中国正在利用美国的基础设施来掩盖其活动，并逃避政府和行业的检测。该国的黑客越来越多地使用利用现有资源技术，使其活动看起来像普通用户的活动。亚当斯基还强调了中国黑客的坚持不懈。他说，当他们被抓住时，他们会退缩，等待一段时间，然后再次行动。美国和印度将共同生产装甲车辆以对抗中国。彭博社，美国和印度宣布计划共同生产斯特赖克装甲车，作为应对中国在亚洲的军事实力的努力的一部分。这一举措将帮助印度加强其在与中国有争议的边界地区的地位，并减少对俄罗斯武器的依赖。大部分车辆将部署在与中国的边界地区，但也会有一些车辆驻扎在与巴基斯坦的边界地区。斯特赖克装甲车由通用动力陆地系统公司生产，以其多功能性而闻名，并被美国陆军用于各种任务。美国此前曾向乌克兰派遣斯特赖克装甲车，以帮助其抵御俄罗斯的进攻。美国驻印度大使表示，美印合作关系越来越紧密，两国正努力加深其国防工业联系，并进行更多的联合演习。华尔街经理人以大幅折扣涌入封闭式基金。彭博社，对冲基金正在购买散户投资者回避的封闭式基金 SEF， 以利用其历史低价。SEF 是上市的封闭式投资基金，购买流动性较低的资产，例如长期市政债券， 其理念是他们永远不需要偿还投资者，其中一些基金借钱来支付更高的股息。对冲基金也在寻求向基金经理施加压力，迫使他们强制清算，为投资者创造收益。截至10月，美国 SAF 的平均交易价格为 8.94%， 高于2013年10月的 6.29%。根据 Soba Capital 的 Boaz Weinstein 的数据，大约1210亿美元的 SAF 以 15% 或更多的折让交易。SpaceX 正在为星际飞船的第2次飞行做准备。华盛顿邮报 SpaceX 正准备第2次发射其星际飞船火箭，此前第1次试飞导致火箭在半空中爆炸。该公司希望最快在11月中旬推出，等待美国联邦航空管理局的监管批准。这次飞行是 SpaceX 的一个重要里程碑。SpaceX 正试图颠覆航天工业，而 NASA 正在投资40亿美元用于火箭和航天器的开发，并将星际飞船置于其自1972年以来首次将宇航员送回月球的运动的中心。然而，由于 SpaceX 的技术困难，到2025年将宇航员送上月球的时间表预计将推迟到2026年。SpaceX 自4月份首次试飞以来一直停飞，这导致碎片散落在德克萨斯州的海岸线上。ChatGPT 狂热推动个人电脑销售，硬件制造商压住人工智能。南华早报根据 IT 咨询公司 IDC 的预测，由于人工智能 AI 的日益普及，个人电脑 PC 销量有望增加。尽管近年来 PC 出货量有所放缓，但制造商们希望日益普及的生成式 AI 产品的采用将促使消费者升级到具备内置 AI 功能的设备。联想公司计划将 AI 技术整合到其个人电脑中，使其能够根据用户偏好和历史文件生成个性化的工作报告。与此同时， OPPO 和 vivo 等智能手机制造商也致力于将 AI 功能整合到其手机中。东京电子公司在中国芯片增长加快后提高了展望。彭博社东京电子公司在第3季度中国对其芯片制造设备的强劲需求推动下，提高了全年收益和营收目标。中国市场的销售额占其季度营收的近一半，达到4280亿日元，约合28亿美元，超过分析师的预期。这家日本公司将全年销售预期上调至 1.73 万亿日元，而原先预计为 1.7 万亿日元，并提高了净利润和毛利率的预测。该公司还表示，中国对成熟节点芯片如功率半导体和汽车芯片的投资强劲，并且 DRAM 投资正在逐渐恢复。在尼日利亚，年轻人在经济困境中寻求快乐时光中的笑气。半岛电视台，笑气也被称为笑气，正在尼日利亚拉各斯的年轻人中流行起来。这种气体在医生进行医疗程序时使用，通过气球吸入，使使用者产生新快感和咯咯笑。由于年轻人之间新的道德准则认为使用背景物质很酷，笑气变得越来越受欢迎。这种药物价格昂贵，每个气瓶约124美元，但年轻人对尼日利亚经济困境感到沮丧，因此使用笑气。笑气使用的激增反映了尼日利亚青年滥用药物的更广泛问题。根据尼日利亚国家毒品执法机构 NDLEA 的数据，该国有超过1/3的年轻人涉及药物滥用。该机构已宣布打击笑气的销售商和使用者，并截获了从中国运来的药物。药物滥用的增加部分是由于年轻人缺乏目标和失业，他们将药物视为逃避困境的手段。笑气的使用不仅限于尼日利亚，在丹麦、荷兰和法国也有报道。在英国已经讨论是否禁止这种药物。笑气在尼日利亚的低收入用户中尚未广泛流行，他们仍然依赖更便宜的入门药物。然而，随着这种药物的普及和价格的降低，预计它也会在这个群体中获得更多关注。瑞士房地产市场仍然脆弱，央行官员表示。彭博社，瑞士国家银行副行长马丁·施莱格尔表示，由于利率上升，瑞士住宅房地产部门的价格增长正在放缓。然而，他警告称市场仍然脆弱，不能排除进一步加息的可能性。更高的借贷成本也推高了租金，可能导致通胀暂时上升。瑞士的房价最近达到了6年来的最高点，引发了市场过热的担忧。瑞士国家银行在过去1年里将利率上调了250个基点， 推高了抵押贷款成本，并推高了租金。拉斯维加斯罢工被避免，温度度假村达成劳资协议。彭博社，3家拉斯维加斯赌场公司，包括温恩度假村、凯撒娱乐和 MGM 度假村，已与226号厨师工会达成劳资协议，结束了罢工的威胁。工会要求加薪，恢复每日客房清洁，以创造就业机会，并对人工智能和其他新兴技术进行保护。这一协议的达成正值11月份的一级方程式大奖赛和2月份的超级碗，这2项活动预计将在拉斯维加斯带来重大经济活动。拉斯维加斯的劳资纠纷是工人利用紧缺劳动力市场谈判更好协议的更广泛趋势的一部分。香港人在英国政治中崭露头角。金融时报，在英国的香港人团体正在发起运动，动员已经移居英国的香港居民参与民主事务。预计到2022年底，通过英国国民海外计划，将有超过18万香港人在英国定居。该计划旨在帮助那些逃离中国对自由的打压的人。该运动旨在确保这些移民知道如何注册选民，动员他们在对香港社区重要的问题上行使选举权，并向决策者传达他们的选票可能决定某些席位的结果。该运动针对的是那些本地香港人口可能影响选举结果的边缘席位。该运动将传播关于承诺解决影响香港社区的问题的候选人的信息，例如中国政策和执法。英国政府已经通过签证途径和4300万英镑的支持计划向香港社区提供支持。英国政府还争取香港社区的支持，因为香港作为英国殖民地的记忆在议员们的脑海中仍然相对新鲜。然而，一些香港人呼吁英国政府对中国采取更强硬的行动，认为英国政府应该早些采取行动追究中国的责任。该运动还强调了英国政府扩大 BNO 签证计划，并为仍在香港的家庭成员提供前往英国的途径的需求。在以色列哈马斯战争中，种族灭绝一词的误用情况。经济学人质疑以色列在加沙的行动是否可以被视为种族灭绝。联合国将种族灭绝定义为有意破坏全体或部分民族、种族、宗教或宗教群体的行为。虽然以色列不符合这一定义，没有证据表明其有意摧毁巴勒斯坦人，但大量平民死亡和对加沙地带的封锁使一些人声称以色列的行动符合种族灭绝的生活条件标准。然而，重要的是要注意，即使以色列的行动不符合种族灭绝的定义，他们仍然可以被认为是错误和严重的。亲爱的观众朋友们，大家好，我是来自6度世界的6博士，是你们在6度简报中的观察员。今天我为大家带来了几则新闻，让我们一起来做个小结吧。首先，中国开发商碧桂园遭遇了多年来最大的销售下滑，这可能是由于资金紧缩导致的。作为一个开发商，碧桂园在过去的几年里一直表现强劲，但是最近几个月的销售额下降引发了人们对其未来的担忧。其次，一位准妈妈为了保护宝宝而努力获得 RSV 疫苗，这反映出了健康政策的问题。这位妈妈花了很多时间和精力来寻找这种疫苗，但却遇到了很多困难。这个故事告诉我们，健康政策的漏洞可能会让一些人陷入困境。第三，美国国家安全局揭露了中国黑客的活动。据报道，中国黑客越来越多地将恶意软件引入美国的关键基础设施，这引发了对网络安全的担忧。这表明中国黑客的技术水平正在不断提高，并且他们对美国的网络安全构成了威胁。接下来是美国和印度共同生产装甲车辆的消息。这一举措旨在应对中国在亚洲的军事实力的增长。这显示出美国和印度对中国的关注，并希望通过加强军事合作来维护地区的稳定。此外，对冲基金正在购买封闭式基金，以利用其历史低价。这显示出对冲基金对市场的乐观态度，并且他们认为封闭式基金具有投资潜力。另外还有一些新闻，例如 SpaceX 准备进行星际飞船的第2次飞行，中国市场推动了东京电子公司的增长，尼日利亚年轻人滥用笑气等等。这些新闻给我们展示了不同领域的动态和挑战，也反映出我们生活中的一些问题。对于碧桂园的销售下滑，我们可以看到资金紧缩对开发商的影响。对于准妈妈的故事， 我们可以看到健康政策的问题，对于网络安全的报道，我们可以看到中国黑客的威胁，对于美国和印度共同生产装甲车辆的决定，我们可以看到地区安全的重要性，对于对冲基金购买封闭式基金的行为，我们可以看到市场的变化和机会。以上只是我对这些新闻的一些观点和看法，我非常期待听到你们的想法。你们对这些新闻有什么样的看法？你们有什么问题想要提出吗？我期待与你们的互动和讨论。最后，谢谢大家的收看和支持，祝大家有一个愉快的一天。谢谢您的收看。上面播报的内容是6度团队推荐的全球专业媒体、智库、政府机构和行业专家的最新报道、分析简报，更详细的内容，请大家去这些媒体、智库的网站阅读。这些内容并不一定反映6度简报的立场，亦不能作为任何决策的建议。6度团队由专业媒体人、学者、科学家组成的独立新型媒体，大家可以根据自己的专业要求订阅各种简报，网址是6dobrief.com。您在世界任何地方都可以通过电邮收到6度简报。
The more cautious approach of the Qing court gave way to a comprehensive reform agenda in 1905, when the news of Japanese victory against Russia swayed the imperial court. That same year, the empire abolished the millennia-long imperial examination system that focused on the teaching of Confucian classics. Reformers urged the teachings of the scientific disciplines along with traditional subjects in the newly sprouted schools, universities, and military academies. Around the time of the Republican Revolution in 1911, science became increasingly associated with the goal of national salvation. In 1914, a group of overseas Chinese students established the Science Society of China with the goal of saving the nation with science. Their work began with the publication of Science, one of China's first academic journals aimed at the popularization of scientific knowledge. In a eulogy of Chinese scientist Ge Linman, one of the founders of the Science Society of China wrote, "Our country is the last to develop science." Mr. Ge Linman hoped that once the Chinese people realized that science is the only tool to save China, and once more and more people engage in scientific work, the country will be quickly renewed. Important contributions will be made, not only to the country, but also to the world. The scientific revolution in China crept into its radical phase during the May 4th movement. Starting in 1919, progressive intellectuals rallied under the banner of science and democracy to eradicate the hidebound Confucian tradition which kept the nation backward. Here, science captured the imagination of Chinese intellectuals and revolutionaries as an all-encompassing value. Chinese intellectuals started to treat scientific progress as an absolute value to be used to criticize or negate other values. For instance, Chinese philosopher Feng Yulan, then a student of John Dewey at Columbia University in 1922, published an essay titled "Why China Has No Science." The question he posed captured the ethos of his time. If we compare Chinese history with the history of Europe of a few centuries ago, say before the Renaissance, we find that, although they are of different kinds, they are nevertheless on the same level. But now China is still old, while the Western countries are already new. What keeps China back? What keeps China back is that she has no science. Defining science as the power to understand and control natural phenomena, Feng Yulan argued that China never developed science because its traditional philosophy had no use for it. While Chinese philosophers sought internal harmony of one's soul, science is an exercise of seeking certainty and power in the natural world. With that analysis, Feng Yulan made his sweeping indictment against Chinese tradition. The Chinese conception of life may be mistaken, but the Chinese experience cannot be a failure. The mind energy of the Chinese people of 4,000 years will yet not have been spent in vain. The failure itself may warn our children to stop searching for something in the barren land of human mind. In other words, if China's tradition kept the nation backward, then the advancement of science demanded a decisive rejection of that tradition. Enchanted by the Nietzschean call for the transvaluation of all values, Chinese radicals sought to free the Chinese mind from the shackles of old values. The chief among them was Qin Duxiu, who pioneered the anti-tradition cultural movement and later led the foundation of the Communist Party of China. In 1919, Qin Duxiu outlined the mission of the May 4th movement. To defend Mr. Science, we must oppose old art and old religion. To defend both Mr. Democracy and Mr. Science, we must oppose the national essence and old literature. The rejection of old cosmology and philosophy required a replacement to fill the void. To Qin Duxiu, that replacement was science. Qin Duxiu was especially taken by the French Enlightenment thinker Auguste Comte, whose positivist philosophy divided human history into three ages: the religious age, the philosophical age, and the scientific age. To Qin Duxiu, China's experience since the 1860s confirmed Comte's theory. China had entered the age of philosophy when Western learning challenged Confucian thinking, but it needed to leap into the age of science with continued reform. In this new scientific understanding of history, what Qin Duxiu called historical materialism, the advancement of scientific understanding would propel Chinese society into a new and higher stage. Scientism flourished in China in the decades that followed the Republican Revolution. Hoping to destroy the authorities of old religion, customs, and political order which the radicals believed were the roots to China's backwardness, reformers appealed to the authority of science to legitimize their social and political agenda. Under their influence, science morphed into a comprehensive doctrine that determined people's values, cosmologies, and grand narratives in the May 4th movement. As Hu Xi wrote in his introduction to an anthology of scientism in 1922, over the past 30 years, one name has achieved almost supreme dignity in the country. No one, whether knowledgeable or not, whether old-fashioned or new, dares to openly express a contemptuous or teasing attitude towards it. That name is science. Whether this almost unanimous belief in science has any value is another question. We can at least say that, since China has been talking about the reform and change of the law, no self-appointed modern man dared to openly slander science. Title II: Humanist Pushback, a clash of two cultures. Scientism was not without its critics. Stemming from a humanistic concern to maintain China's tradition and social fabric, the cultural conservatives despised the radicals' agenda to replace tradition with science. Indeed, scientism's materialistic ethos was an affront to Confucian ethics that placed a high value on personal cultivation, veneration of ancient sages, and the reading of the classics. World War I gave the conservatives a cause to voice their concerns. In 1920, the scholar-statesman Liang Qichao was profoundly shaken by the political, moral, and spiritual destruction he witnessed in Europe during his travel to the Paris Peace Conference. To him, Europe's devastation was a consequence of its excessively materialistic culture, which robbed society of all moral precepts, and he worried that the same fate would befall China if it did not resist the radicals' war against tradition. New authority has difficulty establishing itself, and yet old authority is abolished beyond restoration. Consequently, the entire society is thrown into skepticism, despair, and fear, just as a ship without a compass caught in a storm and enshrouded with a heavy fog at the same time. No one has any idea of what the future will be like. The Europeans had an enormous dream about the omnipotence of science, and now they began to decry its bankruptcy. Following Liang Qichao's lead, Neo-Confucian scholar Carson Chung delivered a speech at Tsinghua University in 1922 that contrasted science with outlook of life. While science was a useful discipline to advance human understanding, it could not and should not dictate questions related to society's outlook of life, including fundamental questions about gender equality, political regimes, religion, and so on. For those concerns, China needed to seek wisdom from its ancient teachings. In other words, science is a tool to strengthen the nation on the global stage, not a doctrine for the human heart. Immediately after Carson Chang made his speech, however, prominent geologist and scientist Ding Wenjiang attacked Carson Chang for resurrecting the ghost of metaphysics that belonged to a former age. For him, Carson Chang's attempt to carve out a subjective and metaphysical realm of morality, art, and religion was fundamentally misled. Instead, Ding Wenjiang asserted that since all things were reducible to matter, science was universally applicable. As the human mind and social connections were phenomena of the material world, they, too, could be rationally reconstructed with the proper application of science. Carson Chang and Ding Wenjiang's debate polarized the Chinese intellectuals in Beijing and beyond, marking the onset of the debate between science and metaphysics. While the ostensible division in this debate was about science and its limitations, the debate underscored a much deeper division. Point 1. On the one hand, supporters of scientism exalted the omnipotence of science, rejected tradition in the name of science, held that scientific knowledge and technological progress were unquestionably good for human society. Scientism's proponents were especially attracted to science and technology-centered grand narratives of human progress. Further, they tended to justify the proliferation of science and a scientific outlook of life based on the need to propel the nation to a higher stage in history. Point 2. On the other hand, supporters of humanism hoped to carve out a moral domain set apart from science. They believed in the necessity of scientific education, but rejected the claim that science could become a moral authority. Most of the humanists were cultural conservatives. To Liang Qichao and Carson Chang, for example, China's Confucian tradition should be reformed and updated for the modern age, but it should also be preserved and treasured as guidance for people's hearts in a time of tumultuous political changes. While scientism upheld the understanding of the objective world as the absolute moral and epistemic authority, humanism looked to the condition of people's heart and the immaterial forces of culture, art, literature, and religion for value. This tension between scientism and humanism would continue to characterize Chinese thinking in the century to come. Title III: Scientism and Humanism in the PRC. The rise of scientism and its pushback from humanists in the early decades of the 20th century captured a dynamic that has replayed itself time and time again in China's political and social development under the People's Republic. Scientism had a particularly strong influence on senior political leaders in the CCP during the Reform era. After Mao's death and the repudiation of the Cultural Revolution, the party had to renegotiate its ruling foundation, and unable to rely on Maoist charismatic leadership and populism, the party turned to scientific progress. In particular, concrete achievements in science and technology programs could demonstrate that the party's rule would bring rejuvenation to the nation. One way that scientism permeated the thinking of CCP leaders was through the party-state scientific network. As Evan Feigenbaum recounts in China's Techno Warriors, 2003, the Soviets helped the CCP organize their scientists into legions headed by generals and bureaucratic officials during the Cold War to work on strategic weapons such as the atomic bomb and the intercontinental ballistic missile. Within this framework, scientists occupied prestigious positions and coalesced around political sponsors to form powerful special interest groups. And to secure funding and their position in the party, these groups intentionally elevated the importance of technological progress in national development. These strategic weaponeers thus further perpetuated a political culture which placed technological achievements at the center of national success. Beyond these special interest groups, foreign ideas also shaped the leadership's perception of science and technology in the Reform era. In The Futurists of Beijing, 2019, Julian Goertz outlined the influence of American futurist Alvin Toffler on Chinese policies in the 1980s. Toffler's idea of a third wave of technological revolution reached the highest levels of the CCP. For example, in a speech he delivered in 1983 to the National Science Conference, then PRC Premier Zhao Ziyang said, "Whether we call it the Fourth Industrial Revolution or call it the Third Wave, these writers all believe that Western countries in the 1950s and 1960s reached a high degree of industrialization and are now moving to an information society. This will bring a new leap in social productivity and thus a corresponding set of new changes in social life. This trend is worthy of our attention and must be carefully studied, based on our actual situation, in order to determine the next 10 to 20 years of long-range planning." Thus, for Zhao Ziyang and other Chinese officials, China's economic and social transformation depended on its ability to adapt to this new technological revolution. The narrative of a world historic technological revolution propelled the party's S&T policy. The risk that China would once again lag in a global technological revolution was too grave to bear. This anxiety compelled the party to launch the 863 program in 1986, a multi-billion-dollar technology research and development program that prioritized fields such as laser science, manned spaceflight, and high-energy physics. But China's 1986 goals in science and technology were noteworthy more for their glamour than for their relevance to China's immediate needs. As Evan Feigenbaum noted, the 863 program mystified foreign analysts. China in the 1980s lagged behind other nations in so many basic technologies, including infrastructure and training, that analysts wondered why it sunk so much money into esoteric areas such as gene splicing and complex new materials. The answer can again be found in the CCP's political culture. The arguments of the strategic weaponers and Alvin Toffler wouldn't have resonated with the CCP leadership had they not been primed to judge political value based primarily on technological progress. Yet this techno-supremacist way of thinking didn't originate from the communists themselves, it came from China's tumultuous struggle for modernization and its radical destruction of the Confucian tradition in the name of science. Ultimately, the CCP leadership came to believe that progress in science and technology was China's ultimate national purpose. As one communist directive put it, technological advancement was a matter of life and death of the nation, and that they alone could steer the country forward. Since humanism challenges the CCP's moral authority, which insists on a materialistic orthodoxy, it sprouts up whenever censorship loosens, and dies whenever the party mows the ground. With the relative intellectual freedom of the 1980s, Chinese philosophers strove to continue the efforts of Liang Qichao to preserve ancient values in modern times. Li Zihu, for example, incorporated traditional Chinese philosophy with the moral philosophy of Immanuel Kant to promote a new value system centered around human beings. Others, such as Gong Yang, sought to resurrect Confucianism and devise a new political ideology according to Confucian ideals. But when this humanistic resurgence started to demand democratic reform and regime change in 1989, these efforts came to a halt. Beyond the CCP's intentional suppression, humanism remains weak in part because it is unable to propose a clear vision for China's rejuvenation. Confucianism has been thrown on the ground for so many times in China, writes techno-nationalist Wang Xiaodong. It has lost its original sacredness as a cultural symbol. Without it being sacred, it could not unify people's hearts. For young patriots today, the only sacred symbol for strength and national salvation is science. Title for the future. Today, Xi Jinping's initiative for innovation-driven development continues the trend of scientism in modern Chinese thought. To him, science is a common endeavor of the Chinese people, and achievements in science bring glory not just to the individual scientists but also to the people collectively. In March 2023, he established the Commission on Science and Technology to strengthen the Central Committee's unified and centralized leadership over the nation's science and technology activities. Indeed, Xi Jinping believes that China must catch the tide of yet another technological revolution. The success of the CCP's science and technology capacity will determine the nation's fate. In a speech to the Chinese Academy of Science in 2021, Xi Jinping located China's technological mission in a world historic scientific revolution. At present, the world is experiencing a new round of scientific and technological revolution and industrial transformation. From macroscopic domains of celestial movements, galaxy evolution, and the origin of the universe to the microscopic domains of gene editing, particle structure, and quantum control, these topics are at the frontier of the current scientific development in the world. And after listing a hodgepodge of research topics he believed were at the cutting edge of human knowledge, Xi Jinping then indicated where China ranked in this epistemic race. After years of hard work, the overall level of our state's science and technology has improved significantly. We have the foundation, confidence, and ability to seize the opportunities of the new round of scientific and technological revolution, take advantage of the situation, and do great things. Inasmuch as the CCP's current SNT policy is derived, at least in part, from a culture of scientism, this raises questions for analysts of contemporary Chinese politics. Point 1. To what degree is Xi Jinping's SNT policy a product of rational calculation to improve China's scientific and industrial capacity, and to what degree is it a product of nationalism and scientism? Point 2. If the CCP does have a value system centered around science, will their values resonate with China's allies in the Belt and Road Initiative? Point 3. Is the culture of scientism conducive or obstructive to China's technological progress? Point 4. And under what conditions could humanism form an effective check against the excesses of scientism in modern China? These questions demand serious reflection in shedding light on the trajectory of China's progress over the coming decades. As debate over China policy rages in the United States, the discussion in Washington is increasingly focused on the question of how to deter Beijing from invading or blockading Taiwan. This is for good reason. Like their predecessors, Chinese President Xi Jinping and his colleagues have signaled a determination to exercise control over Taiwan and will, if necessary, resort to force to do so. Responding to these threats, a growing number of U.S. military leaders, including the former head of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, Admiral Phil Davidson, and Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Mike Gilday, have warned that China could attack Taiwan by 2027. Under its One China policy, the United States maintains strong unofficial relations with Taiwan, as well as formal diplomatic relations with China. Washington's policy has long been to encourage direct dialogue between leaders in Beijing and Taipei, insisting that disputes across the Taiwan Strait must be resolved peacefully. To underscore this position, the United States maintains a significant forward military presence in the Western Pacific. Yet with Chinese aggression growing in and around the Taiwan Strait, there are mounting concerns over whether the United States can preserve the peace moving forward. Many analysts and policymakers argue that the best way for the United States to continue to deter China from attacking Taiwan is to place hard power in Beijing's path. As U.S. Representative Mike Gallagher of Wisconsin stated recently, we need to be moving heaven and earth to arm Taiwan to the teeth to avoid a war. This theory of deterrence places a premium on ensuring that the United States and Taiwan have sufficient military capabilities to frustrate an invasion and to threaten China with staggering retaliatory costs. To deter China, the theory's advocates argue, Washington must dramatically increase its defense expenditures, rebuild the U.S. defense industrial base, and accelerate the speed with which Taiwan is being provided with weapons and other military assistance. Taking these military steps is critical, but more needs to be done. This is because, properly understood, deterrence is an exercise in political psychological persuasion, and it has never been solely a calculation of who possesses more military assets. Deterrence requires an extensive toolkit, including diplomatic patience, nuance, surprise, brinkmanship, and also reassurance and credibility. It is this holistic view of deterrence that is needed in Washington today. Key features of a more effective strategy include a measured U.S. approach to diplomacy that avoids provocative political stunts and a renewed effort to build a deeper, wider, and stronger coalition of countries to support Taiwan's continued security and prosperity. To preserve the peace in Asia, Washington must adopt a more comprehensive vision of deterrence that not only prevents an outright invasion or blockade, but also ensures that Taiwan's economy, democracy, and people can flourish. Title I: Do not risk it. Although Washington's current conception of deterrence relies on defense, its policy on using force in the Taiwan Strait has long been ambiguous. The 1979 Taiwan Relations Act, which continues to guide U.S. policy, states that the use of force or direct violence to determine Taiwan's future would be seen as a threat to the peace and security of the Western Pacific area and of grave concern to the United States. This is not an explicit or unconditional guarantee of U.S. intervention, although it does strongly suggest that a Chinese invasion would provoke a direct U.S. response. But by themselves, words on a page will not give Beijing pause. Rather, successful deterrence depends on Beijing's belief that current and future U.S. administrations, irrespective of party affiliation, would risk the lives of U.S. troops to defend Taiwan if China attacked. Should Beijing doubt this or perceive that the United States' commitment is unsteady or tied to superficial concerns, such as a wish to retain its access to Taiwan's semiconductor industry, then its calculations may well shift. But even assuming that the United States does maintain sufficient military capability and the credibility of its use, these efforts will go only so far to ensure Taiwan's continued peace and prosperity. Beijing defines its claim to Taiwan as core to the political legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party and critical to China's own national security. Over more than 70 years, Chinese leaders have declared their intention to assert control over Taiwan, framing its ultimate return to China as a foundational goal of the CCP. It is hard to conceive of any scenario whereby the CCP leadership would entirely abandon its ambitions on Taiwan based on a calculation of military power. After all, Beijing's appetite for absorbing Taiwan did not diminish during the second half of the 20th century, even as the United States enjoyed absolute military superiority relative to China. Indeed, Taiwan has long been the issue that threatened to bring the United States and China into open conflict. In 1958, U.S. military planners contemplated a nuclear strike on China after CCP chairman Mao Zedong shelled Taiwan Control Islands. In 1995, angered by Taiwan leader Lee Teng-hui's visit to the United States, Chinese President Jiang Zemin ordered the launch of missiles into the waters off Taiwan's coast. In response, U.S. President Bill Clinton sent a carrier strike group toward the Taiwan Strait. Back then, the United States could more freely undertake such responses, since it enjoyed comprehensive dominance over the Chinese military. Today, Washington faces a far more powerful Chinese military that, according to the U.S. Department of Defense, is on track to have 1,000 operational nuclear warheads by 2030. For now, Beijing likely appreciates that a direct assault on Taiwan would be prohibitively costly for China. But if Xi Jinping comes to believe that the political cost of inaction in the Taiwan Strait poses an existential threat to the CCP's rule, he or his successors may well take enormous risks, including a dramatic military escalation. Xi Jinping would entertain such an approach only if all other avenues to unification were closed or if he calculated that restraint carried the highest political risk. There are several such scenarios that could prompt Xi Jinping to act. For example, were Taiwan to formally declare independence, Beijing might well resolve that a significant military escalation was its only politically acceptable choice. An appreciation of this risk explains why the vast majority of the Taiwanese people prefer the status quo. Title II and no more gimmicks. Deterrence, therefore, cannot be understood in exclusively military terms. Rather, a new and broader understanding of deterrence is needed to both prevent an invasion and ensure the security and prosperity of the Taiwanese people. The first and most important element of a holistic approach to deterrence must be a clear and unwavering signal of U.S. support for Taiwan. Political stunts, undisciplined rhetoric, or indications that Washington is wavering in its resolve to uphold its security commitments are likely to lead to more anxiety, aggression, and unpredictability from Beijing. This was demonstrated in August 2022, when the U.S. Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi made a trip to Taiwan. Beijing responded by conducting a massive military exercise in the Taiwan Strait and, since then, has sought to normalize a persistent military presence close to Taiwan's territorial waters. Of course, some might argue that U.S. President Joe Biden should have taken his own steps to counter this brazenness, but that misses the point. U.S. actions in the Taiwan Strait should be proactive and strategic, not reactive and undermined by political theater. Coalitions are also critical to a holistic vision of deterrence. To preserve stability in the Taiwan Strait, it is essential for Washington to strengthen its partnerships with key allies, particularly in the Indo-Pacific and Europe. Symbolic virtue signaling, untethered to any specific objectives, typified by Pelosi's visit, only helps Beijing to paint Washington as the instigator of tensions and to drive wedges between the United States and other countries. Medium and small powers are unlikely to be decisive U.S. partners in the event of a conflict with China. But they can play critical, non-military roles by internationalizing the Taiwan issue and scrambling Beijing's calculations of the costs it might incur by escalating. This is because, for all its formidable strengths, the Chinese economy remains highly dependent on access to international financial markets, as well as on imports of key technologies, technical know-how, oil, gas, and food. Chinese leaders recognize these vulnerabilities and are working to minimize them, but these cannot be solved immediately. The more united that Washington and its global partners are in their resolve to preserve peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait, the greater the risk Beijing faces when considering military operations against Taiwan. Some countries, including Japan, could play outsized roles in this strategy because of their military capabilities. Others, such as Singapore and South Korea, may fill more niche roles by, for example, providing access to U.S. forces for refueling and repairs. The more partners Washington has, the more strategic options it will enjoy. The United States made progress in coalition building in February, when it signed an updated Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement with the Philippines. This now gives the Pentagon access to 9 military bases near Taiwan where it can train troops and station military equipment. Yet as the conversation about Taiwan grows more dominated by the possibility of an invasion, many partners are becoming wary of going further in aligning with the United States and Taiwan on a range of economic and diplomatic initiatives. These countries are fearful that they will embroil themselves in a potentially open-ended and escalating confrontation with China. Such concerns also affect the decisions of global companies and investors, some of whom, including Berkshire Hathaway chairman Warren Buffett, perceive Taiwan as a risky destination for capital given the possibility of an imminent Chinese attack. The United States must show that its underlying goal is to cool tensions and preserve peace in Asia and that it has a coherent, holistic, and sustainable plan to do so. To the extent that there is instability, it is important that key global and regional actors recognize that Beijing, not Washington, is the one stirring the pot. The stronger the coalition the United States builds, the more it will complicate Beijing's risk-benefit calculus. A central U.S. objective must be to make Beijing perpetually unsure if it is adequately prepared to escalate its coercive or military efforts to seize Taiwan. Washington needs to make clear to China's leaders that any battle over Taiwan would not simply be fought in the strait but would become a sprawling global effort to exploit each side's vulnerabilities. U.S. leaders must work to privately impress upon their Chinese counterparts that the risks of expansion and escalation of a conflict could extend into space and cyberspace and could even become nuclear. Title III Accidents and Emergencies. At the same time, U.S. leaders must keep a path open for China and Taiwan to peacefully resolve their differences, even if such an outcome is unimaginable at present. The measure of success is not winning a war with China in the Taiwan Strait. Rather, success would be avoiding a war while allowing Taiwan to develop as a democracy. This will require persistent engagement with Chinese leaders, especially Xi Jinping, to clarify Washington's intentions and explain its interests and concerns, and to request equal clarity from Beijing. U.S. officials must also maintain regular communication with Taiwan's leaders, both to reassure them of the nature of their exchanges with their Chinese counterparts and, if necessary, to work to rein in any unnecessarily inflammatory actions by Taipei. Washington and its partners must also disabuse Beijing of any suspicion that the U.S. commitment to Taiwan is weakening. The recent statement by former U.S. President Donald Trump that he would not comment on U.S. support for Taiwan in the event of an attack because if I tell you an answer, it's going to hurt me in negotiations only increases the space for a miscalculation by Beijing. Chinese leaders must understand that maintaining the credibility of its security commitments is of vital interest to Washington. These commitments underpin the duties the United States has as a superpower. If key U.S. allies and partners are threatened, Beijing must know that Washington will not hesitate to act. The United States must also provide China with incentives to moderate its aggression, not by developing new reassurances but by better acknowledging existing ones. For decades, Washington has declared that it would not support Taiwan independence and, equally, would accept any outcome negotiated between Taipei and Beijing so long as it was peaceful and enjoyed the Taiwanese people's consent. The clarity and consistency of this long-standing commitment has wavered over the past several years, which has inflamed Beijing's grievance that the United States is hollowing out its One China policy. A peaceful and mutually agreed-on resolution may appear far-fetched given Xi Jinping's increasingly coercive approach. A growing number of voices, including President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations Richard Haass, state that Washington's strategic ambiguity is outdated, while others argue that the One China policy is collapsing. But these critics consistently failed to articulate a better alternative that would simultaneously keep the peace and provide Taiwan with the security it needs to continue developing. It is incumbent on those calling for the United States to formally abandon key pillars of its One China policy, support Taiwan's independence, and give Taipei an unconditional security guarantee to articulate what the likely implications would be for the region. They must answer whether such moves would help or hinder Taiwan's security and prosperity, or create a more peaceful and predictable environment for key allies in the region, including Japan and the Philippines. Calling for a radical break as former U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has done with traditional U.S. policy while waving away the consequences will not suffice. At the same time, Washington's support for the status quo must not become static. There are dramatically new dynamics at work in the Indo-Pacific that necessitate new ways of thinking and acting. U.S. policy on Taiwan has evolved and will evolve in tandem with developments around the Taiwan Strait, including Beijing's growing truculence. The United States must remain committed to ensuring that China, as the stronger power, cannot unilaterally impose an intolerable political solution on Taiwan, the weaker one. A degree of flexibility is required to accomplish this. Washington's policy has already proved itself capable of supporting a dynamic equilibrium by pushing back on unilateral attempts to alter the status quo, regardless of whether they emanated from Beijing or Taipei. The real debate is not whether to jettison a policy approach that has preserved peace and protected Taiwan for decades, but, rather, how the United States should evolve its approach within the current One China policy framework. Although there is a seductive appeal to abandoning this policy, doing so would stress U.S. commitments to Taiwan and the region and open up another fault line of risk in an already dangerous world. Unsatisfactory as it may be to many, the U.S. goal is to stretch time horizons, not collapse them. The purpose of Washington's strategy in the Taiwan Strait is to incentivize behavior that serves U.S. interests while disincentivizing actions that threaten them. Hard power is a critical element of the United States' efforts to uphold peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait. It is a variable in the equation, however, and not the solution. To protect its interests, U.S. leaders must become more adept at combining efforts to bolster military capabilities with clarity in their strategic objectives, strength in their coalitions, solid coordination with Taiwan, and a sharper comprehension of the psychology of decision-makers in Beijing. The United States has protected its interest in peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait for nearly 45 years. It has to up its game to continue doing so for the next 45.
大家好，欢迎大家收看6度百科节目。本期节目内容如下：亚太经合会议的背景，发生过什么有趣的事？选择什么地方召开，有什么讲究与典故？请介绍亚太经合会议的背景。亚太经济合作会议 APEC 是一个经济性质的国际组织，由21个会员经济体组成，其目标是促进亚太地区的经济增长、协调和合作。每年的 APEC 峰会都会在不同的会员国家或地区举行，而选择召开地点的原则主要是轮流主持，并且反映出该地区的经济和文化特色。在过去的 APEC 峰会中，有许多有趣的事情发生。例如，1993年的第一届 APEC 峰会在美国西雅图举行，当时的美国总统克林顿邀请各国领导人在他的家乡阿肯色州的一个小镇进行非正式的会议。这种非正式的会议模式被称为阿肯色模式，并成为 APEC 的一个重要特色。另一个有趣的例子是1994年的印尼峰会，当时的印尼总统苏哈托为了展示印尼的文化特色，特别安排各国领导人穿着印尼传统服装拍照，这称为家庭照的照片成为 APEC 的另一个传统。至于选择召开地点的讲究，一般来说，主办国会选择具有代表性或具有特殊意义的城市或地区来举办峰会，以展示其国家的经济成就和文化特色。例如，2001年的中国峰会选在了上海，这是中国经济最发达的城市，象征着中国的经济崛起。2008年的秘鲁峰会选在了利马，这是秘鲁的首都和最大城市，象征着秘鲁的经济和文化中心。总的来说，APEC 峰会的选址和举办方式都充满了各种有趣的故事和讲究，这不仅反映了亚太地区的多元化，也展示了各国共同合作、促进经济发展的决心。亚太经合会议发生过什么有趣的事？还有哪些相关的重要人物和事件？亚太经合会 Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation 缩写 APEC 是一个经济性质的国际组织，成立于1989年。有趣的是，1993年，美国成为首个主办 APEC 领导人非正式会议的国家。当时的美国总统克林顿在西雅图举行的会议中，提出了一项新的会议模式，即无领带会议。这一模式被后续的会议沿用，成为一种独特的 APEC 风格。2014年，中国在北京举办 APEC 会议，当时的中国国家主席习近平以亚太梦为主题，强调了亚太地区国家的共同发展和繁荣。选择召开地点的讲究与典故。APEC 的召开地点每年都会在不同的会员国家或地区，这不仅体现了 APEC 的合作精神，也代表着该地区在全球经济中的重要地位。例如，1996年的 APEC 会议在菲律宾举行，当时的菲律宾总统拉莫斯提出了亚太社区的概念，强调了亚太地区的共同利益和发展。重要人物和事件。1994年的 APEC 会议在印尼举行， 当时的印尼总统苏哈托提出了 Burger Course， 即实现亚太地区自由开放的贸易和投资。这一目标对于推进亚太地区的经济一体化起到了重要的推动作用。2001年的 APEC 会议在上海举行，这是中国首次主办 APEC 会议。当时的中国国家主席江泽民提出了上海共识，强调了亚太地区的经济一体化和区域合作。2009年的 APEC 会议在新加坡举行，当时的新加坡总理李显龙提出了新加坡宣言，强调了面对全球经济危机，亚太地区国家需要加强合作，共同应对挑战。亚太经合会议选择什么地方召开，有什么讲究与典故？对于今天有什么影响？亚太经合会每年都会有一次领导人非正式会议，并进行一系列的相关会议。这些会议通常由当年的主办国承办，而选择主办国的地点通常都有一些讲究和典故。一个有趣的事例是，每年的 APEC 会议，主办国都会为各国领导人设计一套具有当地特色的服装，并在官方晚宴上穿着，这被称为 APEC 风格。这一传统起源于1993年的美国西雅图会议，当时的美国总统克林顿为各国领导人提供了皮质飞行夹克，并在晚宴上穿着，从此开始了这一传统。选择主办国的地点，一方面可以展示该国的经济成就和文化特色，另一方面也是为了方便各国领导人的交流。例如2001年的上海会议选择在上海举行，不仅展示了中国的经济成就，也让各国领导人有机会亲身感受中国的改革开放。对于今天的影响，亚太经合会议的讨论议题经常是影响全球经济的重大问题，例如贸易自由化、经济一体化等。这些议题的讨论和决策对于全球经济的发展有着深远的影响。此外， APEC 会议也是各国领导人进行双边会谈的重要场合，这些会谈的结果也会对全球政治经济格局产生影响。谢谢您收看六度百科，这是由一群科学家、经济学家、专业媒体人、工程技术人员合作制作的百科类节目。这些内容并不一定反映六度百科团队的立场，亦不能作为任何决策的建议。六度百科内容涉及诸多知识领域，我们努力使其内容真实、专业，不存在预设立场。如果受众发现内容有误，赞同或反对六度百科内容，请在我们的节目留言区发表您的高见。欢迎大家到六度世界 6度 World 阅读我们的更多内容，参与六度聊天区的讨论。请订阅我们的频道，给我们的节目点赞，谢谢。
以色列哈马斯战争是否真的正在进行？1991年，法国后现代哲学家让·博德里亚在法国报纸《解放报》上发表了3篇文章，后来翻译并在英国报纸《卫报》上发表，以回应伊拉克的海湾战争。这些文章分别是海湾战争不会发生、海湾战争并没有真正发生和海湾战争没有发生，分别在海湾战争之前、期间和之后发表。博德里亚认为，美国干预萨达姆、侯赛因入侵科威特的行动在很大程度上是象征性的，因此在许多方面，这场冲突在很大程度上是基于象征主义的。此外，对于西方人来说，战争的很多发生都在电视屏幕上。战争是一种积极掩盖科威特和伊拉克实际冲突的性质和事件的方式呈现的。博德里亚在批评海湾战争之前没有社交媒体，所以虽然他的批评今天仍然高度相关，但他错过了今天战争发生的一个关键方面。重要的是，尽管博德里亚否认了海湾战争的存在，但他并没有否认在其中造成的破坏，正是这种破坏使得战争对博德里亚来说无效，因为他认为战争意味着两个对立方之间的一定程度的可比性或冲突。在美国伤亡人数方面，博德里亚写道，简单的计算显示，在海湾地区的7个月行动中，参与的50万名美国士兵中，如果他们留在平民生活中，会有3倍多的人死于道路事故。
2 more Americans have died as the result of mines. The overall U.S. death toll is now 89.
与此同时， 美国联军对撤退的伊拉克车队进行的轰炸和对伊拉克的民用和军事基础设施的轰炸，估计已经杀死了10万名伊拉克人。即使伊拉克人遭受了灾难性的损失，两个对手甚至没有面对面交锋。这意味着撤退的伊拉克士兵在被轰炸时甚至无法向美国军队投降，而是向电视摄制组投降。在很多方面，这在今天的以色列巴勒斯坦冲突中也是如此。在制作本视频时，加沙卫生部估计已有10569名加沙人在以色列轰炸中丧生，还有更多人被困在废墟下。以色列高级安全来源表示，这一数字可能是其2倍，几乎达到2万人。同时，他们还夸耀已经成功杀死60名哈马斯高级领导人。以色列轰炸活动中还存在进一步的不对称。在10月7日哈马斯袭击之后整整1个月，以色列报纸《哈雷兹》只刊登了1152名遇难者的名字，而报纸报道的数字仍然是1400。可能在内塔尼亚胡政府看来，1400才是正确的数字，因为他们把在哈马斯手中的人质也算入了死亡的人数。
אתה הורג אותנו, אתה תהרוג, אתה רוצה להרוג את כולנו, אתה רוצה עם צה"ל להרוג את כולנו, לא מספיק טבחת בכולם, לא מספיק אזרחים ישראלים נהרגו, שחרר אותנו עכשיו。
哈雷兹数字与广泛引用的1400之间的差异是哈马斯夺取的人质数量。战争意味着，或至少曾经意味着，两个相等或至少可比力量之间的激烈冲突。将以色列对加沙的轰炸称为战争是不诚实的，因为它暗示了加沙平民和以色列国防军之间的力量平衡。哈马斯于10月7日的袭击只在超现实意义上是一场战争，这是一场完全象征性的战争，一场针对整个西方秩序的战争，挑战美国和以色列自己视为民主国家的愿景。唯一的战争在涉及可比较对手之间存在冲突的意义上，是一场模拟战争。这正是以色列时报中的 Baronet Goren 在2025年10月25日的战争第19天的日报中嘲讽地称之为信息战。
Thoughts unfolded, and one of them was what an amazing woman, but the other two were, oh my God, what is this going to do to the Israeli PR war, if you will, or information war around the world?She's making them so humane, and
除了在以色列轰炸活动的影像中建立了一场战争，通常是从加沙的外面展示的。我们作为观察者对战争的理解几乎完全是通过电视屏幕和社交媒体。新闻频道通过对以色列轰炸活动的影像，通常是从加沙的外面展示的，来建立一场战争。因此，我们作为观察者对战争的理解基本上是关于遥远的爆炸和伤亡人数的统计数据，然后伤亡人数和图像本身成为了战争的来源。加沙的卫生部是否准确报告了死亡人数？10月7日哈马斯袭击中被杀的人的最新统计数据是多少？我们看到的视频是否被篡改或伪造了？这些问题得到了报道，然后成为以色列官员和巴勒斯坦大使以及活动家将要争取的信息战斗。这场战争的不对称性的一部分，无论是对加沙的不分青红皂白的轰炸，还是信息战，都在很大程度上基于战争的影响。这意味着哈马斯在10月7日的袭击在视频中表现出色，哈马斯战士劫持人质并对以色列人实施暴力的图像有助于符合以色列官员的叙述，即哈马斯，因此所有巴勒斯坦人都是人类动物。与此同时，以色列在轰炸加沙平民方面进行了清洁战争。在哈马斯战士实施暴力的视频中，我们看到哈马斯战士在以色列人身上实施暴力。特别可怕的是，年轻人在 Nova 音乐节上遇到暴力哈马斯叛乱分子的图像。另一方面，在来自加沙的图像中，暴力是脱离人的，也就是说，他与实施暴力的人分开。我们看到爆炸的视频、建筑物倒塌的视频、受伤的、 哭泣的儿童被紧急送往医院的视频，但我们不看到实施暴力的人。我们看不到飞机的飞行员，或者如果我们看到士兵发射迫击炮，我们不会看到迫击炮击中的那些人。这是以色列的清洁战争，以色列军队继续坐在一个虚拟的防护罩后面，铁穹，而数千名加沙人则被炸得粉身碎骨。这也使以色列的宣传机器能够对加沙的破坏提出质疑。如果我们不看到以色列国防军士兵对加沙人实施身体伤害，那么这是真的吗？有报道显示，演员在一部关于加沙轰炸的黎巴嫩电影中化妆，作为证明加沙人只是危机演员的证据。另外，由于我们不能看到投弹人、炸弹在空中掉落和炸弹击中目标的图像序列，因此大部分媒体只能报道遥远的爆炸，然后根据以色列国防军发言人的说法，这些炸弹是针对使用人肉盾牌的哈马斯领袖。因此，在某种程度上，当以色列国防部长约阿夫·加兰特将哈马斯称为人类动物，暗示他们的暴力和邪恶是动物般的时，他是对的。哈马斯参与了一种动物本能，极端情况下使他们能够对其他人造成伤害。这种可怕的动物本能在我们内心，使我们能够在历史上的几乎所有战争中对其他人进行暴力。被忽略的是，加沙的轰炸活动是一种独特的机械邪恶。以色列飞行员在不曾面对他们的情况下炸死了他们身下的人。他们在一套确保目标是哈马斯的军事官僚体系的保护下，免于对平民的伤害。在这场不对称的媒体战中，战争罪犯变得混淆不清。哈马斯显然有罪，匿名的哈马斯暴徒戴着绿色头巾，成为绑架和杀害定居者的明显罪犯。以色列的战争罪行无法归咎于任何个人，因此作为犯罪行为变得更加不合理。是内塔尼亚胡下令执行了特定的空袭，造成数百名平民丧生吗？是以色列空军指挥官汤莫·巴尔吩咐的吗？是一名愤世嫉俗的军事情报分析师坚称一个哈马斯领导人藏在充满平民的特定建筑物中吗？投下的炸弹只是不准确和无目标的吗？以色列的整个军事体制是否接受平民伤亡的概念？可能所有这些都是真实的。以色列的战时政府，以色列军队的高级领导人，挑选目标的情报分析师，投下炸弹的飞行员。但尽管构成这些机构的人对更多的死亡负有责任，但在官僚杀戮体系内，他们作为个体同时更不负有罪行。哈马斯可以由一个戴着头巾的匿名战士所体现，同时又可以普遍化为威胁西方秩序的存在幽灵，渗透到大学校园。
After all the news of the barbarity, and they're out there with pro-Hamas demonstrations, to see schools like Harvard have all these students signing these declarations in support of Hamas.
假扮难民潜入美墨边境。
We know that there's a lot of people that have come into this country who are not accounted for, that we have no idea who they are, haven't been vetted.
以色列的战争则相反，没有一个士兵对加沙的任何死亡负有责任。加沙平民的鲜血分散在整个机构内，对加沙的威胁也完全是物质的，而非幽灵的。同时，在西方，以色列的战略重要性如此重要且如此全面，以至于对以色列作为一个国家，而非世界犹太人的攻击甚至批评，都被视为对西方民主和自由世界的攻击。感谢观看，这是一则关于以色列巴勒斯坦问题的华尔街前线观点文章，第一部分还有许多部分。
Hello， 大家好，欢迎关注华尔街电视频道。这期的热点深度关注可能算是华兴资本包凡一案的最新进展。据中央纪委国家监委网站在11月10日的消息，中国证监会党委巡视工作领导小组办公室原专职副主任杨春蕾被开除党籍和公职， 那据中央纪委国家监委驻中国证监会纪检监察组北京市纪委监委的消息，日前，中央纪委国家监委驻中国证监会纪检监察组北京市监委对中国证监会党委巡视工作领导小组办公室原专职副主任杨春蕾严重违纪违法问题进行了立案审查调查。经查，杨春蕾身为党员领导干部，丧失理想信念，背弃初心使命，单独或者伙同他人利用职务上的便利为他人谋取利益，非法收受财物，数额巨大，违反生活纪律，影响公职人员形象。那公开信息显示杨春蕾曾任中国证监会资本市场学院的纪委书记。那么在这张照片里杨春蕾就是从右往左看的这第3位。那这杨春蕾被双开是怎么就联系上了包凡一案？根据财新的相关报道杨春蕾更为被人熟知的身份是此前被查的华兴资本控股总裁兼华兴证券董事丛林的妻子。而丛林呢，于2022年9月失联，已经是1年多前了。丛林出生于1965年，现年57岁，本科毕业于中国人民大学财政系的金融专业，硕士毕业于中国人民银行五道口金融研究所、长江商学院 EMBA。 丛林呢是一位资深的老工行人，他于1990年加入工行，相继是在总行的信贷部、营业部、国际业务部任职。在1998年，丛林加入工商东亚金融控股有限公司，先后是担任北京代表处的首席代表、公司的副总裁，积累了商业银行、投资银行业务方面的经验。丛林是在2016年初离开了工银金融租赁之后，调至了工银国际控股有限公司出任董事长兼行政总裁。掌舵4年之后呢，丛林又于2020年离开了工作30年的工行，在当年的7月出任华兴资本控股集团总裁兼华兴证券的董事长。那根据财新有业内人士透露，当时华兴主要看重丛林是在工行体系内这么多年积累的资源，特地为他设立了一个职务，表面上分管投行，实际上既有业务，他丛林参与的不多。在2022年的2月，丛林就一度被有关部门要求协助调查，但不久之后他重新现身。在2022年的9月，市场上有关丛林又进去了的消息就不胫而走，或与多位金融租赁公司干部接连被查有关。那丛林被看上的所谓的积累的资源，是不是也包括丛林的妻子杨春蕾呢？针对最新曝光的丛林妻子杨春蕾被双开的新闻，有留言就提到说这个妻子是监管部门领导，丈夫是被监管企业的高管，还能这么玩吗？还有的提到说背靠金融吃金融，还有提到的是这算是政商融合的典范了吧？有人就更直接了，说这就是夫妻店，两口子都挺厉害。再回到杨春蕾，根据报道，杨春蕾早年任职于银河证券团委，在2005年成立的银河证券，虽然大股东为中央汇金公司，但为证监会会管机构，干部任命由证监会负责。至2009年的9月，证监会将党组织干部管理权限划给了中央汇金公司，在证监会管理银河证券人事期间，杨春蕾是调入了证监会人教部。在2016年，丛林调到了工银国际任职。由于需要长期在香港工作，杨春蕾这边是为了照顾家人也随后调入了深圳的资本市场学院，担任纪委书记。资本市场学院呢，是由中国证监会和深圳市政府联合举办的资本市场专业性教育培训机构，由几家交易所出资设立。在2020年，丛林是进入华兴资本，那杨春蕾又调回了中国证监会，出任党委巡视工作领导小组办公室原专职副主任。此外，财新的报道还提到，杨春蕾爱好绘画，朋友圈多次晒出个人作品获得的褒奖也不少。而丛林为何会牵涉到包凡呢？这是因为丛林从工行到华兴可能恰好是触犯了正被严查的旋转门。在3月初，《华尔街日报》就报道说，失联的中国投行家包凡被拘留，牵涉反腐调查。提到就是知情人士说包凡在2023年的2月被反腐调查 人员拘留，涉及华兴资本前总裁、华兴资本香港证券子公司董事长丛林的案件。其中一些知情人士说，丛林之所以成为政府调查目标，与他加入华兴资本前的业务往来有关。丛林在2022年9月被拘留，导致他后来从该公司离职。知情人士也说，在包凡被拘留之前，中国有关部门就曾在几个月内就丛林案的调查约谈过他几次。其中一些知情人士说，调查人员向包凡询问了涉及丛林在加入华兴资本前帮助该公司安排的一笔贷款的可疑交换条件，但包凡并未向调查人员提供所需的全部信息。知情人士还透露，包凡是以一种名为留置的特殊拘留形式被拘，留置期最长期限为6个月，期间被拘人员不得见律师。目前还无法确定中国有关部门是否计划正式逮捕或起诉包凡。包凡是享有中国科技行业并购之王的称号，包凡在中国企业界也是被广为人知，还参加了中国一系列备受瞩目的科技并购，这包括这个手机打车公司滴滴和快滴的合并，以及外卖巨头美团的并购案。他失联的消息在金融和商业界引起的轩然大波至今每每谈起大家还是成为一个茶余饭后的谈资。那华兴资本是在2023年的2月17日确认无法联系到包凡之后这个公司的股价当天应声下跌了 28%。据熟悉调查情况的人士说，52岁的包凡被拘的部分原因是涉及公银国际控股有限公司在2017年向华兴资本提供的2亿美元信贷额度。这笔贷款以包凡控股的一家公司的股份做抵押，本应还在华兴资本赴港上市后偿还。公银国际也是2018年9月华兴资本融资规模近 3.5 亿美元 IPO 交易的保荐人之一。公银国际为国企中国工商银行股份有限公司旗下的一个部门。在公银国际批给华兴资本上述2亿美元贷款时，丛林担任公银国际的董事长。后来他在2020年加入华兴资本，也就是该投行赴港上市的2年后。知情人士说调查人员提出的一个问题就是包凡是否为获得这笔贷款而向丛林提供了在华兴资本任职的机会。其中一些知情人士就透露了说，丛林本应在2019年就加入华兴资本，但拖拉的离任审计导致他的入职被推迟。中国政府高级官员和国有企业高管在获准离职前必须接受离任审计，调查其任职期间是否存在履责不当的行为。那财新此前还有报道说调查人员正在调查丛林在公银国际向华兴资本提供贷款一事中扮演了什么样的角色。那有知情人士就说了，有关华兴资本这笔贷款安排的疑问源于针对丛林在公银国际以及之前在工商银行金融租赁子公司担任高级职务期间业务往来的广泛调查。在过去1年反腐调查还盯上了公银国际和公银金融租赁有限公司的其他几名高管，其中就包括工商银行广东省和云南省分行的2位副行长。而知情人士也补充说其实自2022年年底以来，丛林就一直处于失联的状态。而在2023年的5月底，中国财经媒体《经济观察报》就报道说，知情人士就表示，中国的监察机构对于知名投资人包凡的留置从2023年5月7日起延长3个月。而就在这周，《华尔街日报》有一篇总结观察，提到更多高管在中国的失联给营商环境带来的含义。文章提到，在中国失联的企业高管和政治人物越来越多。最近失联的是一家视频直播平台和一家制药公司的高管。而与此同时中国的政府对涉嫌腐败和渎职行为的打击力度也不断加强，动摇了国内外企业对中国的商业信心。一位知情人士说直播平台斗鱼的首席执行官陈少杰自今年10月份以来一直无法联系上。另外，在深圳上市的沃华医药也表示，该公司的董事长赵炳贤被采取了留置措施，要配合监委机关协助调查。而另一边中国在金融领域仍在持续打虎。上面提到的这个旋转门式的腐败也被认为是中国目前在银企领域的重点打击对象。这周稍早，华尔街电视我们就关注到，中国工商银行原党委委员
副行长张红利涉嫌严重违纪违法，目前也正在接受中央纪委国家监委的纪律审查和监察调查。而对于这个张红利被调查，中国的媒体南方都市报是尤其提到，值得注意的是，张红利在2018年辞任工行副行长之时，时年53岁，正值年富力强的时候。而类似张红利这样未到退休年龄辞去公职到私企任职高管，而落马的金融业的高管不在少数。而不少落马的金融高管被查出离职后继续利用原职务影响谋取私利，是逃逸式辞职和引起旋转门的典型。好了，以上就是今天热点深度的所有内容。更多资讯可以关注6度简报网，网址是6度brief.com， 在上面各位可以订阅各类符合您喜好的简报新闻，有免费套餐，也有更加专业的付费套餐供大家选择。今天的视频就到这里，我们下个节目再见。
观众朋友，大家好，欢迎收看今天的辛枫视线。现在网络上杀猪盘可以说是层出不穷。不知道观众朋友有没有在冲浪的过程中遇到过杀猪盘呢？如果是杀猪盘，您能否辨别出来呢？那么有很多没有辨别出来的朋友，很不幸被骗了几十万甚至上百万。华尔街日报最近就发表了一篇深入报道，北京已经开始注意到这个现象，并且开始严厉打击杀猪盘。杀猪盘通常是来自东南亚的骗子组织，但是他们往往是由中国的犯罪分子所控制的，通过网络和社交平台与世界各地的人建立联系。通常他们会盗用帅哥美女的照片来伪装成是自己的账号，然后寻找目标，并且耐心建立关系，有时候甚至是恋爱关系，然后哄骗目标对象进行虚假投资。他们一开始会制造投资不断增长的假象，让受害者汇出更多的钱，然后他们就会消失了。最近几个月，中国为打击杀猪盘的泛滥，采取了最严厉的措施，将执法触角伸到了境外，大规模逮捕了数千人，主要目标是中缅边境地区。几十年来，缅甸等边境地区一直以赌博、贩卖毒品、贩卖野生动物和贩卖人口出名，现在他们成为了杀猪盘的窝点。他们一般在隐秘的大院里面进行活动，其中许多大院是由中国逃犯所经营的。他们从中国逃到了法律疏于管理的地方，并且每年从中国公民或者在海外的华人那里骗取了数十亿美元。美国财政部在今年9月还警告美国人要警惕这些骗局。除了缅甸的偏远地区，柬埔寨的一些赌博中心也有这些杀猪盘的落脚点。柬埔寨当局曾经在中国警方的协助下进行了零星的突击活动，但是问题依然存在。美国研究人员表示，几年来中国几乎没有对他们进行过执法。在疫情期间，边境贸易停止，互联网使用激增，因此杀猪盘行业开始蓬勃发展。杀猪盘的背后还加剧了人口贩卖问题，很多骗子本身就是人口贩卖的受害者，他们被虚假的招聘广告诱骗到了国外，并且被扣留了工资和护照。联合国人权办公室称，在缅甸可能有超过12万人被迫充当了骗子，在柬埔寨则有10万人。一位人口贩卖的受害者告诉《华尔街日报》，他接受的训练是先花几周的时间或者几个月的时间来养肥受害者，而所谓的养肥就是指取得受害者的信任，然后再宰杀他们。这名受害者表示，他当时是看到了一个招聘网站上的广告后，接受了在柬埔寨从事客户服务的工作，但是一到柬埔寨，他就被赶到了西哈努克一个类似监狱的楼房当中，在那里他在暴力的威胁下被迫从事诈骗工作。他说他有一个负责培训他的人给他提供了一部智能手机，里面预装了假冒的社交媒体账户，一份目标受害者名单，里面还包含他们的联系方式以及各种聊天要用到的脚本。而所幸的是，几周之后，这名受害者说服了一名送货司机，帮助他逃出了犯罪窝点。联合国毒品犯罪问题办公室的分析师表示，中国最近开始发出信号，表示将会不再容忍杀猪盘。今年8月，中国与3个邻国发起了特别联合行动， 并且向控制缅甸偏远地区的武装组织施加更大压力，说服他们追捕并且遣返了近5000名涉嫌从事非法活动的中国公民。中国当局已经锁定了几个属于缅甸，但是完全由华人武装自治的边境地区。这些地方往往吸引了中国公民的大量投资，包括合法投资和非法投资。许多中国人，包括逃犯，都生活在这些法外之地。汉语和人民币在这些地方很常见，这其中就包括被称为缅甸小中华的佤邦。它位于中国的西南边境，北京对该地区拥有很大的影响力。该地区是少数民族佤族人的家园。1949年新中国成立后，中缅两国在1960年签订中缅边境条约，这些居住了华人的地区正式成为缅甸的领土。但是事实上，这些区域随后还是由华人武装组织来管理的。当地的官方语言是中国西南方言，法定货币是人民币。当地人也习惯使用中国的手机卡，习惯通过微博、微信等中国社交媒体来发放和接受资讯。当地连学校的教材都是使用中国人教版的教科书，因此这个地方就被称为缅甸小中华，也成为中国通往缅甸的主要经济门户之一。独立研究人员称，佤邦联合军是该地区的实际领导者，指挥着一支2万多人的部队，装备有便携式地对空导弹和装甲车等中国现代化装备。近2个世纪以来，该地区一直是鸦片的主要产地，近几十年来也已经成为人工合成毒品的主要产地。美国财政部于2003年将佤邦联合军列入黑名单，并且制裁了数十家与该组织有关联的个人和企业，称其为东南亚最强大的贩毒组织。除了毒品交易之外，现在佤邦联合军和其他犯罪网络越来越多地转向了诈骗。根据中国国家媒体2022年的一份报告，在过去1年中，中国总共封堵了210万个诈骗网站和价值516亿美元的可疑交易。中国政府已经警告公民提防可疑的回扣提议、投资计划以及自称代表公司或执法部门的人来主动联系你。北京开始认真清理杀猪盘的第一个迹象出现在今年的9月初，当时中国与佤邦联合军合作策划了为期2天的突袭行动，最终有1000多名嫌疑人被送回中国境内，并且被中国警方拘留。随后，中国加大了对该组织的打击力度。10月12号，中国公安部称，已经对2名被指控领导网络诈骗的佤邦高级官员发出了逮捕令，他们就是佤邦建设部部长陈延班和佤邦孟宁县的市长肖延全。根据当地媒体报道，这2位官员分别持有中国云南和中国广东的身份证。4天之后，佤邦联军称这2人已经被解除职务，他们现在下落不明。而在同一天，中国当局表示，已经在2天前从缅甸移交了2349名电信诈骗犯罪嫌疑人，这是一次性移交人数最多的一次。中国称，自今年年初开始镇压行动以来，已经从缅甸遣返了4666名犯罪嫌疑人。欧洲智库国际危机组织的缅甸问题专家表示，无论是从哪个角度来看，这都是一次重大行动，说明了它对中国和中国公民的影响，以及中国政府现在对待此事的态度。但是抓捕4000多人的规模可能还是远远不够的。中国中央电视台在今年8月就曾经报道称，缅北与缅东至少有1000个诈骗团伙，每天有超过10万人从事电信诈骗活动。而当地居民表示，尽管中国加强了打击，但是这些团伙仍然在继续蓬勃发展。他们喜欢寻找一些擅长使用电脑并且擅长交流的人，让他们充当网络诈骗者。专家表示，尽管中国可能会加大对边境地区犯罪分子的打击力度，但是由于诈骗利润丰厚，诈骗团伙很可能会寻找更加肥沃的土地，那些执法更加不严的偏远地区可以继续经营诈骗活动。这些团伙基本上不会轻易消失，因为世界上还有许多法律脆弱的地方是他们可以利用的。所以在节目的最后也提醒观众朋友，天上不会掉免费的帅哥美女，大家一定要保持警惕，不要因为几张擦边照片就迷失了方向。 以上就是今天新风视线的全部内容，感谢您的收看。这里是华尔街电视，如果喜欢，记得点赞并且订阅我们的频道。我们下期节目再见。